A number of fascinating and controversial bills are getting hearings these days in Austin over abortion, religion in schools, and high-speed rail. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, we'll discuss them all.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Coming up this hour, Houston Public Media's Kyle McClanagan on a bill that would directly impact a long-debated proposed high-speed rail line between Houston and Dallas. We'll discuss a bill that would offer doctors and nurses guidance on when they could, in the rarest circumstances, provide an abortion in Texas. And this week's non-expert panel weighs in on bills in Austin that would bring religion more directly into Texas public schools. Plus, producer Brenda Valdivia completes her quest to create the ultimate Houston sandwich. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up this hour, lawmakers are considering a bill that would clarify when doctors can provide an abortion in Texas and why. We'll share the latest. We'll discuss other bills to bring some of that old-time religion to Texas public schools on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Brenda Valdivia concludes her quest to create the ultimate Houston sandwich. But first, the Houston Cougars' metaphorical road to the NCAA Men's Final Four Saturday may have been a long one this season. The literal road was much shorter. Teams traveled just a few hours west on I-10 to San Antonio. That's where the Cougs will take on Duke in the Alamo Dome. Tip-off slated for 7:49 Saturday night. That's an oddly specific start time, which may get bumped back a little anyway, depending on how long the preceding match takes. The early game, tipping off at 5:09, will feature Auburn against Florida. All four teams were number one seeds in the tournament this year. A victory means they play for the championship Monday night. Tomorrow's game is the Cougars' seventh trip to the Final Four and second under coach Kelvin Sampson. The first time in 2021, the Cougs lost to Baylor, who went on to win the championship. 2 years later, the Cougs advanced to the Elite Eight, but couldn't quite crack the Final Four, which was played here in Houston. They lost to Miami, limited by an injury to star Marcus Sasser. Sampson noted this week how much one key injury like that can influence a basketball team's fate and why that gives him hope for success this weekend.
Let's face it, the reason this team is in the Final Four is because of our health. When's the last time we've been healthy? People said, were you disappointed after the Miami game? I knew why we lost. We weren't going anywhere without Marcus Sasser. This is not, coach don't make no baskets. Marcus Sasser can, though. He's pretty good. But this team is, God has blessed us.
Houston Cougars coach Kelvin Sampson, in case you're wondering, yes, he knocked wood a couple of times after saying that. The Cougs are led this season by guard L.J. Cryer and forward Juwan Roberts. Both are UH graduates. They, their teammates, and Sampson were cheered on before departing for San Antonio. Before hopping on the bus for San Antonio, Sampson and the team were cheered on, as I said, outside the team's athletic complex. More than 100 students and fans on hand. Among them, UH alum Natasha Saad, who says she's attended every Cougs basketball game the past 2 years and is ready to see them come home with the championship trophy.
Well, it's good for the school. It puts Houston on the map. It gives us a lot of recognition. I also want the parade. If we win, I'm pretty sure there's a parade, big celebration. It'll get all the community together. Everyone will take UH more seriously. We've been getting called the underdog, so this would be really good for the school.
UH alumna Natasha Saad there. The Cougs again play Duke Saturday night, and if they win, they'll be in the national championship Monday against either Auburn or Florida. For longer than this program has been on the air, there have been efforts to develop and at times derail a high-speed rail line between Houston and Dallas. The concept on its face seems simple enough, a train that would travel fast enough to get you from one city to the other in about 90 minutes. But the devil's in the details. Some communities and landowners in between don't want it. Others might want it, but only if there's a stop along the path in their town. There are economic, environmental, land rights, and other challenges that have stalled the project's development, even as the private company behind it, Texas Central, has sought to partner with Amtrak to make it happen. State representatives heard arguments this week over a bill in Austin that would make it that much harder to pull off. Houston Public Media's Kyle McClanagan is here with more. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
What exactly does House Bill 1402 call for?
Yeah, so House Bill 1402, which was written by Rep. Cody Harris of East Texas, would basically prevent, say, if a railway is coming through a town, the local government or the state government from using taxpayer money to help divert roads away from that railroad.
And what is State Representative Harris's motivation for this bill?
Yeah, so Harris said the bill was created in direct opposition to the proposed Houston to Dallas rail line. He specifically mentioned Texas Central and says the company wants to avoid paying taxes, but wants to use the same taxes for its project.
And so who else is in support of the bill?
Yeah, so Waller County Judge Trey Duhon supports the bill. He's also the president of Texans Against High-Speed Rail, and he said he has long argued against the Houston to Dallas rail project. He says that HB 1402 is, quote, HB 1402 will ensure that public funds are safeguarded from being wasted on a, quote, washed up, overhyped, underfunded, bait-and-switch high-speed rail project.
Sounds like he doesn't like the idea of the project.
No.
What other arguments are being made in support of this bill?
Yeah, so proponents say the proposed high-speed rail project's projected path interferes with some development projects currently in the works. And William Papadopoulos with Delta Troy, a commercial real estate developer, said the project has stalled the company's plans for development near Hockley, which is northeast of Houston.
Is it northeast or northwest?
Northwest. Thank
Northwest,
you.
Yeah. Hey, we got so many communities up north. What do high-speed rail supporters say about the bill?
Yeah, so Peter Lakoti, the president of the nonprofit Texas Rail Advocates, told the subcommittee on Monday that the bill unfairly and narrowly focuses on one form of transportation and one company and doesn't create a level playing field. He said, quote, it will cripple the ability to advance any high-speed rail project in Texas.
What about Texas Central itself, the company behind this proposed project?
Yeah, so Andy Gant, who was there on behalf of Texas Central CEO John Kleinhertz, said the project was not asking for taxpayer funds and that its impact to private property would actually be less than that of ongoing interstate projects.
Any sense as to whether this bill will, in fact, come to a vote at any time?
Yeah, so at this moment, it's been left pending in the House Transportation Funding Subcommittee that held the meeting Monday, meaning that it would need to be voted out of committee before making its way to the full Texas House, and then would need to be voted out of the House, and then would also need to make its way through the Senate. So at this time, it's not really clear what the future of the bill is like.
Kyle McClanagan is a reporter with Houston Public Media. Kyle, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And up next, the latest on another bill in Austin, which would clarify when doctors can provide an abortion in Texas and why. Details ahead as Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Texas lawmakers are considering a bill that would clarify abortion exemptions. Senate Bill 31 has the support of the Texas Medical Association, which represents doctors, and it would appear to reinforce existing updated guidance from the Texas Medical Board, which regulates licenses and disciplines doctors. Dr. Sharif Zafran is chair of the Texas Medical Board. Laura Portuando is a reproductive rights expert with the University of Houston Law Center. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Laura, let me start with you. What are the situations in the last year or two specifically that have prompted this bill?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of tragic situations arising as a result of a pretty vaguely worded abortion restriction here in the state of Texas. That includes some high-profile cases that have made their way all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court, wherein women have been denied timely care for essentially pregnancies gone wrong, miscarriages, need for treatment in the wake of that. That has led them to have serious medical complications, including impacts to their fertility. And in fact, we've seen some instances of women, young women, mothers actually dying as a result of delayed or untimely care because doctors were afraid of the vague Texas abortion bans.
Yeah, and afraid specifically because there are laws on the books that would target them if they run afoul of those abortion bans. And so that's what has caused some of them to be jittery about, I theoretically could spend the rest of my life in prison or, face serious consequences if I get this wrong. right?
Exactly. The Texas Supreme Court and some pro-life advocates have been kind of quick to blame doctors and say they're being overly cautious here. But when you look at the consequences that the law imposes, as you just mentioned, right, potentially punishment of life in prison, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, loss of a medical license, and therefore a livelihood, it makes sense that coupled with what is truly a vague law really means that doctors are giving a wide berth, and it's very understandable that they're doing so, wanting to make sure that really a situation is very obviously and unquestionably a crisis before they can provide that care, so that they can then defend themselves in court and say, look, any reasonable physician would provide the care at this point. Of course, the longer you wait, the worse the situation gets, the easier that argument gets to make.
Dr. Zafran, how difficult has it been for health professionals to navigate this and make those calls?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. Whenever there's a bill that comes out and talks about exceptions to treatment, especially when you're banning abortion, and there's exceptions that are laid out in there, the worry is what exactly are those exceptions? And we, as a medical board, are very hesitant to start codifying that, because exceptions really, in many instances depend on circumstance, place, and time. But after the state Supreme Court gave a directive to the medical board last year to help define what medical reasonable judgment is around threat to the mother's life or potential for permanent organ damage, we started looking at in rulemaking codifying what we would deem to be an appropriate response by a physician in determining what reasonable harm would be. We also talked a little bit about making sure that imminence was not something that you needed to worry about, et cetera, et cetera. What is valuable about the proposed legislation is that, in essence, it codifies a lot of things that we, as a medical board, put into rule last year. We're very happy to see that a lot of the provisions in our rulemaking are actually defined in the proposed legislation, defining medical emergency to allow abortions when a pregnant woman faces a physical condition aggravated by pregnancy that places her at risk of death or substantial impairment of major bodily functions is exactly how it's defining those provisions. Mandating physicians to act in ways that maximize the likelihood of an unborn child's survival during treatment of the mother, unless doing so poses greater risks to the mother. Clarifications that physicians will not be penalized. This is really key in the legislation, in the proposed legislation, clarifications that physicians will not be penalized for their reasonable medical judgment in emergency situations, and specifically ectopic pregnancies or complications related to spontaneous abortion. More clearly defining what ectopic pregnancy is, but also, and I think this was something that everybody got caught up in helping define a lot of these things, but there's a mandate in the legislation or the proposed legislation to ask the medical board to provide for continuing education that anybody who provides obstetric care has to take at least once, that helps both physicians as well as legal professionals and health providers to better understand these regulations. One of the concerns that we had is that there was a lot of confusion around what these rules were. And, as was mentioned earlier, when there was some instances of harm done, we don't want the lack of understanding the rules and regulation to be a cause of that. So mandating that we have continuing medical education and continuing legal education for lawyers and regulators out there to help make sure that they understand what does imminence mean, what is the definition of things like ectopic pregnancy or spontaneous abortion, and making sure that the lack of understanding of what these rules are not a cause of not providing proper care.
Laura, so Dr. Zafran there kind of laid out what the language in this bill specifies, in particular that whole serious risk of substantial impairment to a major bodily function. Is that clarification enough? Is the language clear enough?
Yeah, I mean, so there is some improvement in terms of clarity, right? I think one big thing the law does, before it said there had to be a life-threatening physical condition that poses a risk of death or a serious risk of major bodily impairment. Notice there's a risk of death twice in there. So that actually suggested there might not be really an exception for major bodily harm. So that is a clarification, and that's somewhat helpful. But I think it's still pretty vague in a lot of locations, right? You can fix parts of the ambiguity without necessarily fixing all of the ambiguity. I think there's still a lot of ambiguity, for example, in this question of what constitutes a serious risk to a major bodily function, right? How serious does the risk have to be? How substantial does the impairment of the major bodily function have to be? That is still ambiguous, and you have to remember that this is still a reasonableness standard, which in kind of legalese means that it's an objective standard. It's possible that other experts could come in and question the judgment of the physician about whether really there was that serious risk or not. So the problem is that when you have this kind of an exception, it's always kind of necessarily going to be a little bit vague, especially when you have that kind of an objective standard. And looking at these, what is serious? That's kind of not an answer that there's a really clear answer to.
Aside from ambiguity, could there be any other unintended or unclear consequences of this bill that maybe wouldn't be apparent on the first read?
Yeah, so a number of reproductive rights organizations, as well as some physicians, have actually voiced opposition to this bill. They've done so first on the ground that they think it remains ambiguous, doesn't do enough to fix the ambiguities. But another big question and objection that they have is what the impact of this bill could be on potentially reviving an 1857 abortion law here in Texas. That was the law that was actually invalidated by Roe versus Wade, but it was never taken off of the statute books. It has been adjudicated by the Fifth Circuit quite recently to be repealed by implication. That means, it's essentially off the books, even though lawmakers never did that. However, Attorney General Paxton has taken the position that actually this old abortion restriction, which is broader than Texas's current abortion restriction, is enforceable. So what's interesting about this bill is that it actually updates the exception to that 1857 law. So some reproductive rights advocates worry that by modifying that old law, that's giving fodder to the argument that in fact that law is not repealed by implication, but still governing today.
Laura Portuondo is a reproductive rights expert with the UH Law Center. Dr. Sharif Zafran is president of the Texas Medical Board. Thank you both very much.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just from that reasonableness, I think there's a really, really important point. I just want to make sure that it's understood.
Sure, briefly,
the bill does say that any physician who thinks that there's reasonableness as to the woman's life is something that the medical board would look at as being as an exception. I think the key thing here, because there's always going to be ambiguity when you look at, exceptions, but the burden of proof has shifted to the state to prove that the physician did not act in a reasonable manner. And the way the statute is specifically laid out is that it would say that any physician thinking or believing that it is reasonable to make sure that abortion is necessary to make sure that the woman's life is saved, or that there would not be any major organ damage or so forth, is something that we would be looking at as a standard. So that is a very, very wide discretion that we are given to physician judgment in this bill that was not there earlier or before.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. We appreciate it. Thank you both for joining us. And just ahead, still more bills in the Texas legislature prompting interest statewide. These call for adding a little religion to Texas public schools. This week's non-expert panel weighs in on that, on the good, the bad, and the ugly, as Houston Matters continues. A lot can happen in a week. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it downright ugly. When faced with intriguing developments in the week's news, we turn to a rotating panel of non-experts to parse the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. On today's panel, Jennifer Hedaya, Executive Director of Air Alliance Houston, Marco Roberts, Chairman of the Texas Conservative Liberty Forum, and Marcus Davis, owner of the Breakfast Club restaurant. Jennifer, Marco, Marcus, welcome to Houston Matters.
Good morning.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Panel, the Texas Senate late Tuesday passed a bill that would allow teachers to pray or engage in religious speech in the classroom. As Houston Public Media's Andrew Schneider reported this week, it's the latest effort by Texas Republicans to use a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision to expand the role of religion in public schools. SB 965 joins other bills passed by the Senate awaiting consideration in the House, which would also require the Ten Commandments to be displayed in every public school classroom and allow for prayer or Bible readings during during the school day. Proponents of such bills argue a 2022 Supreme Court decision allowing a high school football coach to pray on the field during and after games opens the door for such legislation. Opponents say the bills represent religious coercion against a captive audience. No word on when or whether the Texas House will take up the bills, but even if they pass, they seem likely to face court challenges. The state Senate says, give me some of that old-time religion in public school classrooms. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Jen?
Well, I'm going to go right out there and call this ugly. Ugly because I think it's a deliberate attempt to stir controversy by poking at people's very deeply held personal beliefs around faith and free speech and then plopping it all down in the most objectively controversial setting of this entire legislative session so far, the public school system. To make matters worse, the bill itself is exactly 20 lines long. It's a page. Contains virtually no details, and fails to define the terms that are at the heart of the matter, such as what it means for an educator to, quote, be on duty, or even what is religious speech. And to be fair, there was an amendment introduced that would have brought clarity to the bill by excluding instructional time, but that amendment failed. And that might be the clearest window into what this bill was intended to be. So if this were a codification of the Supreme Court ruling, then the amendment would have passed because that's what the ruling said. But truly, if that were the case, I don't think the bill would have needed to be introduced at all. We have constitutional law, labor law, EEOC that all protect against religious discrimination in the workplace. So for me, this is at best intended to stir controversy. And at worst, I might agree with some of the critics that it's a veiled attempt to force religious speech onto other people in the public school system that wouldn't have a say if the bill passed, namely students and their families. So for me, I think it's messy. I think it's ugly. I think it's just there for controversy.
Okay, good, bad, or ugly? Marco Roberts.
I don't know that actually makes that much of a difference. So, I mean, I don't think it's bad, but I wouldn't go as far as saying it's good only because looking at the bill as I was pointing out here, it's not very long. It's very brief. It looks to me like nothing more than a restatement of what's already been decided by Kennedy versus Bremerton. I agree, it's vague, but that just means that it's going to, I just don't see any direction in this law that any changes anything really. I don't think it's intended to divide people, but I do think a lot of people in this country feel besieged. There's that sort of sentiment, and so this is sort of a reaction to that. But I also have to tell people, things have changed, and I think they may imagine that this is a almost entirely Christian country as it was maybe 50 years ago, or 90% of folks identified as Christian. That's down to the 50s. It's a big change. And they may not be anticipating that this law would apply just as much to a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu, and they may be surprised by that application. So I always tell people, be careful what you're asking for if this is really what you want. But in general, it's true that there's been kind of a pushback in terms of saying I can't, like the whole thing where with the coach, the football coach who was praying, and they were trying to stop him from doing that. Clearly, that was an example, and we all agreed that was going too far. People should be allowed to make their own praise if they want to. Then there is the issue of the captive audience, as people say. This leaves it all open, but again, the First Amendment is what rules in this case, so I'm not particularly worried. And again, I do think that perhaps we'll be making more room for Muslims and Buddhists and others to actually exercise their own religion, because for a lot of people of faith, especially some of these other religions, they're instructed to bring their faith into everything they do. Now, obviously, you have to be careful when you're in schools what that means by that. But in my opinion, if it makes it more possible for a Christian or Muslim or a Jew to engage in their faith at school without imposing it on other people, then I don't see any problem with it.
Okay, good, bad, or ugly? Marcus Davis.
I think this is as just about as ugly as it can get, simply because, and Marco, I hear and agree with your sentiment of if this provides a space and opportunity for the Muslim, the Buddhist to practice their faith, then this is great. I also agree, be careful what you wish for. We have a religious bias in this nation. We have a religious bias towards Christianity in this nation. This rule is not being put in place for anything other than Christians. And while, yes, the First Amendment will hopefully protect, I believe that this is an attempt to go in a certain direction that will bode only in favor of Christianity. The coach praying on the sideline or after the game, yes, he does have a right to do that. He is entitled. And I agree that a person should be able to practice their faith. But I can promise you the minute that someone of the Muslim faith stands up in front of their classroom and begins to quote the Quran or pray in Arabic, the parents, the school, this body that's passing this law will have an issue with that. We have a religious bias in this nation, and I think this is an attempt, in my opinion, to prop up the faltering numbers of Christianity. I think this is an effort to raise Christianity higher than it is because the numbers are failing. I don't see anything beautiful coming out of it. I hope that this would be a place of freedom. But we live in a nation, in a city where we just had a school outing where we're afraid to say it was because of the end of Ramadan, right? We don't acknowledge certain things. We live, I don't know if you guys saw the rant that occurred with the ex-husband of the congressperson, where a person was told to go back to their country because they were wearing the Muslim headgear. I don't see this as a true and genuine, authentic effort to expand religious freedoms. I see it as a ploy to minimize religious freedoms. That's my opinion.
Well, I think people ought to know, and of course it does include that there's two parts of this bill that are both kind of vague, right? One says you can pray, and one says, but it also can be restricted for compelling state interest, also vague. And so it's got both elements in there. That's why I'm saying I'm not thinking that this bill does much of anything. I think it's more symbolic, in my opinion. But perhaps it would have been better if the amendment had passed and outlined that. But in general, I'm not concerned that I think this is going to be resolved correctly in the end. I don't think it has a chance. I don't think it's going to pass. But even if it does, I think it's healthy to have this discussion. And perhaps as we move about this, because we are becoming a more increasingly diverse country with more people from other religions, that we do start talking a little bit more, what is the appropriate? Because a lot of those folks are going to want to bring their religion into the schools because they're used to doing that in their own countries. And so maybe we should talk more about how do we do that in a way that protects people's individual rights to live their life in their faith that they want to, without, at the same time, as we all recognize, not imposing that faith on other people. You talk about the example of a Muslim getting in front of the class and praying in front of everybody. Well, obviously, I think that's kind of an imposition, right? But would that be the same thing if he's praying quietly at his desk before he starts his class? Then I would have no objection because that's what he's...
Oh, right. And that part I get. But I think that this will... Because there's a part in there that talks about encouraging or allowing instructors to encourage their particular faith, if I read that correctly.
Yes, I don't think that's in the bill.
Yeah, the bill doesn't encourage the promotion of a faith, but it prohibits negative actions taken against an educator that prays or shares religious speech. But again, the vagueness of the bill doesn't say when that can happen.
And in my opinion, that's promoting.
It's allowing that to happen within the instructional day.
Right.
I'm struck. I had a high school civics teacher who was fond of saying routinely that your rights stop where another person's rights start.
I learned that too.
Yeah.
We went to the same elementary school, apparently.
Yeah. And it strikes me how often the conversations we have on this program really boil down to that there is something going on that somebody wants to pass, somebody wants to move on some policy, something, and it really comes down to, okay, well, this will support the rights of party A, but it will cause a problem for the rights of party B, and your rights stop where another one starts, so can we do this?
And I think one piece to that is, have we forgotten that young people in an educational setting also have that same set of rights? And it feels as though political ideology is being imposed within the school day, within the public school setting, and forgetting that those students and their families have rights just as much as that teacher does as well. So yes, that's exactly how someone explains civil liberties to me.
Well, I think it's a good point. I think that's the ideal. But then, of course, in reality, what we know, the reality is that sometimes our rights are at tension with each other, right? There's a balance we have to strike, and we want to think there's a perfect answer, but it's going to be a judgment call.
My favorite ones are the Supreme Court cases where they are trying to decide between one person's First Amendment right and another person's First Amendment right.
Exactly, which does happen.
Sometimes different clauses, sometimes the same clause.
Right. And to go back to the point that I was making about why I believe this is an attempt, even if it's just showmanship, right? I still believe it's an attempt to prop up one religion over the other, because as this bill joins another bill that would require schools to post the Ten Commandments and promote reading of the Bible. They're not putting up bills that will require other tenets from other and books from other religions. It's only about Christianity, and that's why I believe this is going down a rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, there are other bills, and I don't know. I know they touch on that, and I think it does matter how they're worded. I would just simply say that it all depends on the context, right? Like we'd have the picture of Moses at the Supreme Court building, but the context is, what's the context, right? Is this about Judaism, or is it about writing laws? And of course, in that context, it's okay because the Supreme Court says, well, in this context, we're talking about law giving. If we're talking about quoting the Quran or the Bible or any other scripture, if you're talking about the history of a region, well, then that seems appropriate. Some of this seems common sense to me. I realize that there will be people who will try to take advantage of that. But again, I think that the Supreme Court has spoken on this repeatedly, which is the context of, are you talking about proselytizing, or are you talking simply about eliminating historical?
Well, the context of the one bill that Marcus was pointing out is every single public school classroom. So they might be teaching math.
That was going to be my point. The
yeah.
context is the public school setting.
Right.
This is not the context of a class on faith. This is not a church. This is not even.
And that bill's already passed in the Senate.
The context is within the school day of teaching our students what they need to know to pass tests and have productive lives in reading, math, art, STEM. It's not a faith-based class.
Well, exactly, which is why I say be careful what you ask for, because as soon as, and this is why I don't think they're going to go through, because a lot legislators are aware. I mean, our organization is making them aware of that, and basically it's saying just be aware that once you cross this line, the Quran is now also within the same law can be asked to be put in that same place. Is that what you're asking for? I can tell you a lot of people are not thinking this way. They're not considering how this applies.
I think that you're correct. There are some that are not thinking that, but I think that there are those that are thinking that, and they're thinking it from a bullish standpoint. They're saying it doesn't matter. When it comes time to stomp that out, we'll stomp that out. That's just what I chuckled earlier because you said something hilarious. You said common sense in the same sentence as legislators.
Panel, the Port of Galveston's pursuing an alternative cruise line to replace Princess Cruises, which announced last week it's dropping future plans for a slate of cruises from the island. Port of Galveston Director and CEO Roger Reese tells the Cron that the port's begun talks with an unnamed alternate cruise line while leaving the door open for Princess to return. The cruise line may be best known as the home of the Love Boat or for its ad campaign featuring Ted Lasso actor Hannah Waddingham. What it apparently won't be known for, according to Cruise Industry News, is the now shuttered 17 cruises that were to leave Galveston between November of next year and March of 2027. But one of its boats, the Regal Princess, will still launch out of Galveston from this October through March 2026. The Port of Galveston says, nothing to see here. We're moving on after Princess Cruises announces it's sailing away. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Marco?
Well, I mean, it's hard to position anyone sailing away as a good thing and not coming back because, it's not it's hard to position that as, oh, this is wonderful because, why are they leaving? Reading the story, I couldn't get any details as to why. There was nothing in there, but there's something, so it's kind of like, well, something they don't want here. I don't know what it could be. So it doesn't sound good. I do think, though, that it's kind of far into the future. They mentioned that it's not a big part of their business. It did get my attention to the one other thing about Galveston, though, really kind of a different picture, because it's a major port, right? I didn't realize it was the fourth busiest port in the country for cruises, number one outside of Florida, because the other three are in Florida, right? I didn't know that. But here's what's interesting. Why does this not make Galveston grow? I mean, Galveston peaked in population around 1960 and has been going down ever since, right? And so all this business, what is it about Galveston that is causing this city to just continue to shrink?
Extreme weather.
You think that's what it is?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Oh, not the topic, Craig. Sorry.
Oh, no, okay. That's all right. Maybe, I don't know. But, it peaked in 60. Actually, a lot of cities, a lot of inner cities, but some didn't. Some continued to grow, but other cities did not. Mm-hmm. Like Houston continued to grow, but Galveston did not. It makes me think, it just goes to show that sometimes I would hope that the Port of Galveston, as busy as it is, would be leveraged by the city into becoming a much more, because the population of the United States has gone up by almost triple in that same time.
I imagine that they certainly have a lot of tourists who, before they hop on those cruise ships, will spend a day at the Strand and that sort of thing. So I'm sure there's some of that going on.
Yes, but I do wonder. It makes me wonder, why are people not actually leaving? What there's something that's not working for the city, in my opinion.
Not the topic, but the story of Galveston in 1900, which was poised to be the city and not Houston, was leveled in the face of a massive hurricane and flood. So I think it is.
And the innovation of Houston creating its own port.
That's true, but the city did continue to grow for the next 60 years. So that is, I mean, it did stop that, but it basically went, from around 10, 15,000 people to almost 70,000 by 1960. So it continued to grow. Something changed after that.
Princess Cruises, good, bad, or ugly, Marcus.
Let me just say it. Port of Galveston, I did know the strength of the Port of Galveston. I'm in the tourism business, and so I know how much tourism comes to Houston to go to Galveston to take the cruises. I see them week in and week out at the peak of cruise season. Farewell to Princess. It's their loss. We've got a great port here that I'm certain that other cruise lines are ready, willing, and able to join us, or maybe the ones that are there will expand there. If it's a loss, yes, that would be ugly if it's not replaced. But I'm confident because of the attraction that Galveston has, and Houston has, they won't have a problem finding someone. So I'm excited for the next version, the next cruise line that will sign up to grace the shores of Galveston, the Port of Galveston. Yes.
All right, good, bad, or ugly, Jen.
I promise to keep on topic. Because this is exactly the kind of topic that fills me with warm and fuzzies that I love coming on your show for, Craig. So I used to love The Love Boat. This is where I'm starting on this one. It was must-see TV for me on Saturday nights, followed by another 80s TV gem called Fantasy Island.
Yes.
So
that was Galveston.
Was it?
No, I'm just kidding.
My God.
Yes, so, Mr. Rourke lived around the corner.
That would have been fabulous. So I truly remember the first time I saw the Hannah Waddingham ad, and I was filled with the same rush of nostalgic feelings. And I believe the term that's been associated in regards to this ad is something called nostalgia, which is a modern twist on an old guilty pleasure. And in general, I think that term perfectly sums up the moment I think cruising is having right now. So remember, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we heard stories about cruise ships stranded for days, unable to dock. We've all heard stories about the, frankly, disgusting infectious disease outbreaks that have on cruise ships. But now we're starting to see a resurgence of some romanticism around cruising and a little bit of salaciousness and drama. So there's a reality show about the staff of a luxury cruise line. There's a new show about a cruise ship doctor that's doing very well. And now, of course, Rebecca from Ted Lasso is out cruising. So for Princess Cruises to cancel these departures right now, for us, I think is bad. We need our limitless French fry buffets and massages and dolphin sightings and all the things that Hannah is experiencing in that ad now more than ever. Bad for business, bad for nostalgia, and bad for Love Boat aficionados like me.
What makes you know that they canceled versus being canceled?
Well, we heard in the story they canceled 17 departures.
I know. But
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is what makes you know that Princess... that the Galveston didn't want this. Hey, it's time for us to move on.
Oh, that Galveston said, please leave.
There's a greater opportunity.
Please, we don't want your business.
Yeah, that sounds...
I'm not sure about that.
Versus Princess saying, we're taking our business somewhere else.
What makes you know this isn't the case of the New York Giants getting rid of...
he's just being optimistic.
Getting rid of Saquon Barkley and then the Philadelphia Eagles picking him up and going to the Super Bowl.
They ought to hire you at the Port Authority over there. They should.
Can you not tell I'm auditioning to be a spokesman?
Right. I'm sorry to say, Jen has to catch a cruise ship, so we're going to wrap it here.
I do.
Jennifer,
are you really going on a cruise?
No. I love cruises, though. I would do that. Hannah Waddingham, call me.
Jennifer Hedaya is Executive Director of Air Alliance Houston. Marco Roberts is Chairman of the Texas Conservative Liberty Forum. And Marcus Davis owns the Breakfast Club restaurant. Jennifer, Marco, Marcus, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Craig.
you.
Something for everyone.
Over the last month, Houston Matters producer Brenda Valdivia has been on a quest to develop the ultimate Houston sandwich, one made entirely from local ingredients, baked, roasted, matured, pickled, and harvested right here in Greater Houston. She's traveled to bakeries, cheese shops, delis, and farmers markets. And now it's time to assemble the sandwich with the help of Edible Houston editor David Leftwich and Michelle Wallace, owner of Between Sandwich Company.
So not only do ingredients jump out to you, but something like, if you remember, I was like, Dairy Maids. So the maker of something jumps out sometimes, a lot of times. I can trust Dairy Maids. I know their product. It's incredible. So when I see someone that I know and trust and love, like, that makes me excited too. Because like, I know I'm grabbing something from them and now I'm going to go create.
And this is a very creative looking table right now. There really doesn't look like there's any rhyme or reason. And I kind of love that too, because we have this idea of like food being, especially now, like very meticulous kitchen style, like the Bear, everything needs to be super elevated. And then you make a sandwich with stuff you just have. Like there's no plan. I didn't tell anyone what ingredients I had on the table until you walked in.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the beauties of a sandwich is that you can use, if you kind of go like, you think about, we don't make these so much, but so many sandwiches used to be like some sort of meat or chicken salad base. Basically, you were taking, leftovers from the night before. So if you had roast chicken left over, if you had fish left over, you're usually taking that, maybe you would add like a boiled egg, you make a chopped up salad, throw in, like if you had leftover garnishes, so it was, some of sandwich making was a product of not wasting anything.
And leftovers.
Yeah. Well,
I am a huge leftover sandwich fan. So, if you're at home and you got that leftover Chinese food, turn it into a sandwich.
Okay, wait, walk me back towards that. What have you made?
Chinese?
Yeah, what Chinese food ingredients have you made into a sandwich?
Oh, General Tso's chicken. Girl, you throw that into some anything. First of all, I am, not from an affluent family, although it's full of love. We didn't have a crazy amount of money. Anything goes on white bread, child. You can mix it with, toast it up.
A lot of burn through sunbeam at my house growing up.
Yes, we were a Wonder Bread family, but yeah, anything goes good on white bread or wheat bread. So General Tso's chicken, throw some onions on there if you got at home, some cilantro, scrape the extra sauce on the bottom, girl. That is a good sandwich. So does the order of which you build your sandwich matter?
I'm going to leave that one to you because, if I'm as a home cook, it's just kind of like usually condiments, probably, I don't know. I would probably sometimes do the veggies on, like probably the meat and then the veggies. Like if I'm doing a hamburger, it's backwards, but the veggies go on the bottom. But I think with this, probably the meat and then the veggies and cheese.
Yeah. I would agree. I think it is what you're building, so I would agree with that. Typically, I like a sauce at the bottom and then go from there. So meat, veggies, cheese, or meat, cheese, veggies.
Do you sometimes go from, I'm trying to create a flavor profile, or do you start from an ingredient and then go from there?
Probably starting, it depends. Sometimes I have hardly anything in my refrigerator, and so it's like I have this X, right? I have this item. What can I do with it? And then I'll build from there. Or I may say, oh my gosh, I just picked up some cool pepper jelly from the market. What can I do with it? So typically it's usually an item and then I'll build around it. So, I'm cheating. I'm eating an in piece.
Go for it. You have to know the ingredients before you can make the sandwich. You have to taste that. That's half of cooking is tasting everything beforehand.
Absolutely.
Taste the entire time. That's half the process.
Absolutely.
It's also what they never mention in most recipes is taste. Taste it as you're making. Taste all the ingredients. Taste it as you're making it.
That's a great tip. I usually, when I'm writing my recipe, like when I was, in a restaurant and I know someone else is following it, it's always the last thing is taste and adjust. Yeah. Taste and adjust.
constantly.
Because regardless of who makes it or whatever, it's something always is not there.
You know, sometimes you're like, whatever, if you're using pepper, like, a jalapeno or something, like sometimes they're like super spicy, other time they're extremely mild, depending on where they came from and when they were harvested and how long they've been sitting around.
You got it.
I almost like thought about bringing a local vinegar and olive oil with me because I like a little acid on any, like, I feel like that's another thing about cooking is like people don't realize how important acid is to like bringing up the flavors. Yep. And if you like a hot sauce, that acidy hot sauce, if you add, you don't have to not to make it hot, not necessarily heat, but just to give it a little bit of heat and just bring up that, flavor, just splashing in some apple cider vinegar.
It brightens it up. It just makes it really shine when you add that touch of acid.
That's such a, I feel like there's like, if you're tasting something and you need to bump up the flavors, two of my go-to things is to add acid of some sort and Vietnamese fish sauce.
The Houston Chaos Sandwich by David Leftwich, dripping in sauces. Sourdough pan mole, Magnol French baking. Corned beef and pastrami from Kenny and Ziggy's. Pimento cheese by Words and Food. Texas Gold Cheddar by Velhusen Cheese. Micro arugula, micro beets, and micro onions by Mighty Greens Houston. Dilly Jilly Hot Sauce by Prophecy Foods. Pickle Juice by Farmer Elizabeth's Afri Harvest Farms.
There's so many different flavors that don't, like if somebody told me this, I'm putting dill sauce and pimento cheese and microgreens, I'd be like, okay, but it all just melts.
It's like a beautiful chaotic sandwich that comes together like a band, like, you know what I'm saying? So y'all are singing a great song over there.
Well, that's also the danger of, like, this is kind of the way I cook at home because I shop at a lot of these places, like the farmer's market. So I always end up with all these, like I always overbuy. I don't usually, probably make this mistake of not having a plan. So I'm just buying what looks good. Like, these greens look good this week or whatever. And then I get home and then I got to put it all together. So
it works. Like in this instance, it definitely worked.
The Houston Charcuterie Sandwich by Michelle Wallace. Lighter, brighter, creamier sandwich. Baguette Bread by Magnol French Bakery. Turkey, roast beef, corned beef by Kenny and Ziggy's. Micro beets, micro arugula, micro onions by Mighty Greens Houston. Red onion by Atkinson's Farms. Crescenza cheese by Lyra Rosa Cheese. Flavored mayos by Ahoy, provided by Michelle Wallace. And a side of pickled vegetables provided by Farmer Elizabeth Afri Harvest Farms.
I'm sorry, David. We have a winner. I mean, it's so crazy how different these sandwiches are using a table of the same ingredients.
That cheese really, like, brings everything that...
So, yes, this is from Libra Rosa. He practically threw this cheese at me. He was so excited about it, yes.
I mean, the texture of it is so lovely. It's so creamy. You get that cheese factor nuttiness in there. The meat, I mean, this is really like a good, this is
definitely where all the parts add up to something pretty special.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Is the sandwich greater than some of the parts, or is it just the sum of the parts? And I think that a really good sandwich is probably greater than the sum of the parts. Probably, I don't know. When you have ingredients this good, you're kind of glad to be able to taste all of them. But it shows that if you put good ingredients together, you can come up with something really good.
Okay, so we got the Houston Chaos Sandwich.
Yes.
And the Houston Charcuterie Sandwich.
Dining with friends is always better than dining alone.
And making food with friends is always lots of fun, and then getting to share it because that's the best part.
Oh my God!
Should we have? Thank you for having us. Thank you for having me.
Should we have sandwich parties where people just bring a different ingredient?
Yo, let's make that happen.
This is it. This is the end of my journey. Are there any final words that you have?
Just nicely done. I really appreciate you taking the time to truly put energy into learning about the people, the product, the love that goes into it, and it is a great story to tell, and I appreciate you doing so.
Yeah, I love the in-depth dives that you did with the different vendors and producers and bakers, and just highlighting how much great locally made, locally produced, locally grown food that there is in Houston. You know, we're a big city, but if you start digging around, you can find all of these great local vendors who are doing amazing things that then you can use to make amazing food at home.
For the past month, I have met people who wake up at 3 a.m. and get up, whether they want to or not, and make bread or make sure that the vegetables and fruits that they're loading into the trucks are fresh and clean and ready to eat. They work alongside their partners, their siblings, their family members. They play music to cheer up their grandparents or make candles just to give them a little something extra to sell on the side. They're people who stake their hopes and dreams in cheese and bread and lettuce and tomatoes and hot sauces and anything else that you find in your local community. So, for my choice of the Houston sandwich, whatever you want it to be, so long as it's from Houston.
We heard Michelle Wallace, owner of Between Sandwich Company, and Edible Houston editor David Leftwich putting together the ultimate Houston sandwich with Houston Matters producer Brenda Valdivia. And that'll do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. On Monday's show, whatever happens in the Final Four and other developments in Houston sports with Jeff Balke. And we welcome your Houstonian pet peeves. It'll be the first Monday of the month. Send them now to talk@houstonmatters.org. I'm Craig Cohen. Have a great weekend. Then join us Monday for those and other Houston Matters.